letting the chips fall where they may. But I'm kind of curious. I'd like to talk about this feedback that I keep getting. Like Epistemic Duty said that I like to make people feel guilty. To me, I don't see that. But people do end up acting like they're feeling guilty, or I'm making them feel guilty. Uh, so that's a part of it. But it's funny because I'm against guilt. In my 20s, old philosophy used to be about things like courage and blah, blah, and courage and honor and stuff. And I believe those should be brought back into modern philosophy, and can be. But things like guilt, I just think that's an installed worry ward so that the lord, the slave owner, and preacher can control people. It's a slave thing. And if you get rid of guilt, if you make a big mistake, or you find out, oh, you did the wrong thing, or good intention or bad intention, it can be devastating, that mistake. Feel devastated by it, but it still doesn't have to be a guilty reaction, because you can just take responsibility and then work to rectify it. And to a certain degree, this lets it off your chest right away. If you're honest with yourself and really, you shouldn't just pat yourself in the back and not do anything about it, but make up with the person you wronged, or somehow compensate if it's possible in those cases where hopefully it is. And often it is, little things. You break something of somebody's that you borrowed, and so you buy them a new one. It's like, oh, but that was my favorite one. You're like, I'm sorry, but I tried to, or actually, oh, this one's better than my old one. You never know. But you can try, and often it works out well enough. Often people will forgive you just for trying, right? Okay. Online, I don't care at all about that. In the real world, I've learned to, I don't know, it's easy to tell. But it's like online, I don't think I'm supposed to worry about if I cause guilt. I certainly don't advocate guilt. I've certainly never used that, what I consider guilt language, like, shame on you. People might feel shamed. I make an argument that shows they should be ashamed. That's how they're thinking about it. From my analytic point of view, what I've come to think is that the main issue is that I am perceptualist and an empiricist. I consider that the scientific method. I use a skeptical and perception-based approach. As a relativist, I think other people have other points of view. If they look crazy, maybe it's me that's crazy. Maybe we're both crazy from each other's point of view. That remains possible. But as a skeptic, I assent to what I think is the case. So I say that. This confuses people. I used to think that was the problem. People just don't understand that it is possible to grant credence or legitimacy to somebody else's position and disagree with them. But I think there's more to it. I think the real thing is this perceptualism and empiricism. Because a lot of people, so like I'd love to draw a map of the current wars. These wars, I don't want to be warring. I want to collaborate. But whatever, it's the philosophical battlefield. And it's come up in all of them. You've got to define the term first. We have to define feminism, and then say about feminism. We have to define consciousness, then we will say. We have to define, and that's not how knowledge works. It's just not. It's factually, you are mistaken, right? So I'm a relativist. Everybody could have their own opinions, but there's certain things, because of our relationships, that put us in common, that we all have to admit in some level. You can be in denial, but then you're in denial of reality. How is that possible with relativism? Well, because we all need to breathe oxygen. We're on an almost spherical planet, and so on and so forth. Okay? Because of things we share. Doesn't mean everyone in the universe. No, physicists say that there might be like a kind of a universe that can't go slower than the speed of light. And it's separate from us. The rules might be totally different. They might be all backwards or just half backwards or whatever. But it's not really that significant to the human condition. You're talking about things that humans have to deal with, social policies. Okay, so the way I approach this, that seems backward to you guys, and you often say, you're twisting words. I think I'm going to make a PowerPoint to try to really tell you guys what's going on, because I presented this for 6 years, but it's always like, hey, here's how I do it. And now I'm realizing, you know what, guys, up your calculus, there's better ways of analyzing things. And this happens to be a way that you already use. It's a cognitive science. You can demonstrate this as how a human brain works with information. Starting with the human brain, evolution having already happened, not knowing every fundamental because we're already here in the 21st century. And looking at what the machine, how it works in the 21st century, there's things you can know about it that you guys, not me, are getting backwards. You don't define terms first. That never happens. That's impossible. That never happens. You always define them after you've named them. And when you name them, that could be considered identification. It could be considered classification. It could be considered arbitrary provisional organizations. Those are just words, Pierre. You're always there. You go twisting the words. No. The words have meaning. They have the following meaning, which I will display in an example. And there are infinite numbers of these examples, because it applies in every case where you're learning about something new. And your guys' problem is you're part of thousands-of-year-old society, and you don't know the difference between something new. Your idea of learning something new often is something you learned as a kid, but it was old by then. I'm talking about learning actual new things. Let's say 60,000 years ago, you migrate to a new area. You see a new kind of animal. Do you have to define what the animal is ahead of time? No. As you keep seeing it, you see similarities. You see 7 different kinds of new animals. At first, they're all going in similar groups based on their size or something. As you get more impressions, more data, you can categorize more finely as you need to. You say this is a coyote. You still don't know what it is. Is it a kind of spirit or anything? You might have any weird theory if it's that long ago, right? But you have it in a set. In philosophy, we call this set the extension. The set of things, the term, the name, the symbol, the word, are meant to represent. And it's separate from the intention, where you start to describe what's in that set, how to put it. I saw something. Does it go in that set? That's the intention. So it's not just like, looks, I know it when I see it, yeah. And you try to say, well, let's do better than I know it when I see it, because remember that time we put dogs and coyotes all in one big set and it didn't work out that quite right, and then we even put big cats in there with the dogs and then a little cat. Oh, it got all fucked up. So what the human mind tends to do in history, and I think it's partly built in, is morphological definition. The first intentional definition with an S doesn't mean that you intended it, but it kind of plays on that. It's one of these terms that was misspelled at one point in philosophical usage, and they kept the misspelling because it's a different term than you're used to by intention. Don't think of it as intended, but there is sort of an intended aspect to it, because it's like, here's what we want this set to mean. We put everything in here because they look alike, and the very first intention is usually a description of partial features, of partial things of how they look. They have ears like this, and they're this size, and da-da-da-da-da. Eventually, in the modern world, we get an even better definition, right? Like a genetic definition. A coyote is a coyote if it's generationally descended from a coyote, if one generation away. You can use induction and try to figure out how far to go before you want to call it something else in evolution, but, for right now, human experience. And this is better than morphology. Why? Well, kind of a brutal case, I guess, a little bit gross case, but let's say a pair of coyotes has a mutant baby, and it doesn't have the shape, the morphology of a coyote, but it has the genetics of a coyote. Well, this is a way to say, look, it's still a coyote. The morphology is still in place, mind you, because you're saying the form of the genes is the same. So if there was a parasite in a coyote that came out, you could tell whether it had been a parasite, something else, or was a mutant coyote. This is always how we identify everything. Cause and effect, that starts off as an extension of situations. Hey, that happened and then that happened. That's the same as when this other very similar thing happened and then another very similar result happened. Those all go in a big set. If we're asking what are feminists like, we have to say, well, who are we going to take as feminists? You can do that subconsciously, but you have to make that decision. Who are we going to count as feminists? Now, there's a couple obvious ways to go about that. With something like activism, you can say everybody that calls themselves a feminist. That's one way. I would accept that way, but it's inferior to my criteria for something like feminism, something I apply to anything that should be considered as a form of activism, not an ideology. Fede likened it to Catholicism. No, it's an area of activism. If you analyze it that way, then I would call feminists people that actually are activists. Right? They often are active in many progressive areas. And I would look at that as the group of feminists. And I would have a big extension. These people are all feminists. Look, some of them are radical femmes. Some of them are, anti-radical femme, but they're gender egalitarians. They're also in a men's right category. It's just a matter of filing so that you can focus on one thing at a time. It's like, well, people should just be treated fairly in general. Yes, they should, but in some ways they already are. So you got to look at the ways remaining where they're not. See, so I start with the group, and then I find out, well, what are the principles that hold them together? Nobody's ever shown me an extension of feminists where the proper intention is they all hate men. If you say, take feminists that have actually accomplished things, like getting women to vote, look at that literature. You're not going to find much man-hating in it. You can infer it from the women empowerment, but you're not going to find much man-hating, and the proof of that is that once they got the vote, women kept voting for men as leaders. They preferred men still in America. Or maybe that was rigged, who knows. No, but they vote for, if it was rigged, it was psychological because they vote for men. How man-hating can they be? I don't think any of the suffragette posters say, men are scum, they're all rapists, we're never going to vote for another man ever when we get to vote. I don't think so. But you could propose some extension. Say, well, here's a group of feminists. But the extension that the MRAs and the anti-feminists proposed is women that hate men. But that ignores the group, the self-ascribed group. Because even though the self-ascribed group isn't the best in the world, it might include a lot of blowhards. You do kind of have to always refer to it with activism. And you could say, well, but you're corrupt. Oh, but you're fake and you're just opportunist. You don't really believe in it. Oh, you're just a self-promoter. You can do this, kind of internal affairs kind of thing on the group. And you have to when it's just by self-ascription. And the way you do that internal affairs is you have some other thing like, well, what have you actually accomplished? What do you really do? Consciousness, awareness, the same thing. I'm trying to put things in groups based on morphological patterns, based on, okay, they look the same to me. All these parameers seem to look the same to me. I think they're the same. So they're in one group. They look, all of these living creatures have what looks like intentional behavior. They're all in one group. And then I'm saying, well, what are the intentional things and what are the properties? I have other groups based on other properties. Like I have a group of things that have an internal awareness. I'm sure I'm in it. It seems like all humans are in it. Seems like all mammals are in it. Seems like all vertebrates are in it. Seems like all creatures are in it to me. And what changes is it gets dimmer and dimmer. It's not as sharp. It's, there's certain, you don't have memory of lost loved ones if you don't have a brain. Maybe not in some cases, even if you do. The brains are all designed for different things. They have different particular characteristics you can only learn by studying that particular animal. But the thing that people forget, or not forget, but that makes me look backwards to them is you're going backwards. You've got to define awareness, then look for it. I'm not going to define an infinite number of things and then look for them. I'm going to notice patterns in the world, and then I'm going to make my generalizations. And I'm going to test those generalizations and see how they interact, changing the size of that original group, right? Like a mutant coyote that morphologically isn't a coyote. I go, oh, and then you have to conclude, well, sometimes coyotes give birth to coyotes, sometimes to other things. And then genetically go, oh, that isn't a group of coyotes. See, your intentional theories, after you test them, sometimes you change the group. Or maybe you test them by seeing how they change the group. Maybe it makes more sense for that to be a kind of coyote to me, whether I know about genetics or not. And noticing that, well, look, I've discovered genetics, and if I use that instead of morphology, this thing is in that group, and I can judge whether I like that result. And that's what we do, and then we trial and error that in reality. And we get our abstraction slowly but surely through that process. Now, you and I are talking about the state-of-the-art of thinking. We're not talking about the things that have been figured out for thousands of years and are right. We're talking about things where the best course of action is to throw away the intentions as much as possible and look at the extensions and come up with as many theories, that don't violate the things we've now learned as possible to act as the intentional definitions.